The invitation came on a Tuesday. Not an invitation, actually, the opposite of one. I was standing at my kitchen counter, still in my reading glasses, a cup of coffee going cold beside me, when my phone buzzed. A text from my son. I assumed it was something ordinary. He needed a recipe, or maybe he was confirming Sunday dinner. My son had always been a little distant since he started dating Renata, but I told myself that was normal. Young love, new relationship. I gave him space. I gave him time. I gave him everything I had, honestly, and I had been doing that for 31 years. The text said, "Mom, Renata and I talked. We've decided the wedding should be just close family and our friends. We don't think it's a good fit for you to be there. Please don't make this complicated." I read it 3 times. I set my phone down. I picked up my coffee. It was cold. I drank it anyway. My name is Barbara. I'm 63 years old. I live alone in the house I bought after my divorce, a pale yellow colonial in Asheville, North Carolina, with a magnolia tree in the front yard that blooms every April whether I deserve it or not. I raised my son Eli by myself from the time he was 9 years old, after his father, my ex-husband Gordon, decided that the life we'd built together wasn't the one he actually wanted. Gordon left for a woman he'd met at a dental conference. I wish I were making that up. I didn't fall apart. I didn't have the luxury. I worked as a florist for most of my adult life. Not a hobby florist, a real one, with a shop on Meriwether Street that I ran for 22 years. I did weddings, funerals, corporate events, hospital deliveries. I knew every vendor in Western North Carolina. I knew which bakeries were reliable and which ones would show up an hour late with the wrong flavor. I knew which photographers would actually send the files within a month and which ones would hold your memories hostage. I knew how to make a $100 budget look like $400, and how to make a lavish celebration feel intimate and warm instead of expensive and cold. When Eli told me he was getting married, I cried. Happy tears, the real kind, the kind where your chest fills up before your eyes do. I had met Renata twice, once at a birthday dinner for Eli, once at a brief and slightly stilted Thanksgiving where she spent most of the meal on her phone. She was beautiful and composed, and she looked at my son the way I hoped someone would look at him, so I told myself the stiffness was nerves. I told myself she just needed time to warm up. Eli asked if I could help with the wedding. He said they were a little stretched financially, that Renata's family had offered some money, but it had strings attached. Her mother had very specific opinions about venues, and her father was already paying for a rehearsal dinner at a place that cost more per plate than I made in a week when Eli was little. He said it would mean a lot to him. He looked at me with those eyes he's had since he was a boy, the ones that still looked exactly like the eyes of the 9-year-old who cried in my car the night Gordon left, and I said yes. I said yes to the florist. Obviously, I still had my connections even though I'd sold the shop 3 years ago. I said yes to helping find the caterer, the string quartet, the linens. I said yes to co-signing the venue contract because the Whitmore estate required a guarantor with established credit, and Eli's was still recovering from a car loan he'd struggled with in his mid-20s. I said yes to the deposit on the photographer, a woman named June Holloway who I had worked with for 15 years and trusted completely. I said yes to all of it. Over the course of 8 months, I had contributed, in money, in labor, in favors called in, and reputation staked, somewhere just over $19,000. $19,000 in a Tuesday morning text that said, "We don't think it's a good fit for you to be there." I want to be honest about what happened inside me when I read that, because it wasn't what you might expect. I didn't cry right away. I didn't call Eli. I didn't call my sister Helen, who has been my best friend for 63 years and who would have driven over from Hendersonville in 20 minutes to sit with me on the porch. I just stood there in my kitchen, in my reading glasses, with my cold coffee, and I felt something very quiet and very clear move through me. I thought, he has no idea what he just did. Let me explain something about being a florist. For 22 years, you learn a great deal about contracts. You learn what language matters and what language is decorative. When I had retired and handed over my client list to the young woman who bought my shop, I had also kept copies of everything I understood to be valuable, old habits. And when I had helped Eli coordinate the vendors for this wedding, I had done what I always did. I had been thorough. The venue contract for the Whitmore estate? The guarantor, had the right to cancel with full refund of the deposit if written notice was provided no fewer than 45 days before the event. The wedding was scheduled for the 14th of June. I received Eli's text on the 15th of April. That was 60 days out. I had not thought about this when I first helped him. I had thought about it approximately 45 seconds after I put down my cold coffee. The photographer, June Holloway, was an old friend. When I had booked her for the wedding, she had told me quietly, "Barbara, if anything goes sideways, you just call me. I won't leave you hanging." June is the kind of person who means what she says. She had been at my shop the day Gordon served me divorce papers. She had brought me a sandwich and sat beside me without talking, which was exactly what I needed. The caterer was a man named Ellis, who had worked with me on and off for a decade and a half. The string quartet was a group I had booked through a woman I'd mentored when she first started her event coordination business. The florist, a different one now, obviously, was someone I had trained personally during my last 2 years running the shop. Every single one of them had a contract with my name on it as the primary contact and guarantor. I didn't do anything that Tuesday. I made myself wait. I want to be clear about why I waited, because I think this matters. I wasn't being calculating in a cold way. I was being careful in a human way. I had raised this boy. I had sat up with him through ear infections and nightmares and the terrible weeks after his first heartbreak when he was 17. I had watched him graduate high school and college, and I had cheered loudly enough at his college commencement that the woman beside me had touched my arm and smiled. I loved him in the most ordinary and complete way a person can love another person. I waited because I wanted to be sure I wasn't acting out of hurt. I waited 4 days. On Saturday morning, I called Eli. He picked up on the third ring, which already told me something. He was expecting me to call, and he had decided to answer, which meant he had prepared something to say. He said that Renata felt I could be overwhelming. He said her family had certain expectations about the guest dynamic. He said he hoped I understood that this wasn't personal, that I was still his mother and he loved me, that we would celebrate separately, just the two of us, maybe a nice dinner after they returned from their honeymoon. I asked him, very gently, if he understood that the Whitmore estate contract had my name on it as guarantor. There was a pause. "Mom," he said, "don't." "I'm not threatening anything," I said. "I'm asking if you're aware of the contractual situation." He said he assumed everything would move forward as planned. He said he trusted me to do the right thing. I said I trusted myself to do the same. We said goodbye. I sat on my porch with Helen for 3 hours that afternoon. I didn't tell her what I was considering. I just needed to sit with someone I loved and look at the magnolia tree and breathe a particular way you can only breathe when you're outside and the air smells green. On the following Wednesday, 38 days before the wedding, I drove to the Whitmore estate and spoke in person with the events coordinator, a calm and professional woman who handled my paperwork without comment. I recovered the full deposit. Then I called June Holloway. I called Ellis. I called the string quartet coordinator. I called the florist I had trained. I told each of them the same thing. The event had changed significantly and I was releasing them from the booking. I thanked them. I told them I would send referrals their way whenever I could, which I have done faithfully every year since I sold my shop. Every single one of them was kind about it. June said, "You don't owe me any explanation, Barbara. Just take care of yourself." Ellis said he was sorry things had gone the way they had, that he'd always liked Eli as a kid when he used to come into the shop after school. The florist I had trained cried a little, which made me cry a little, and we agreed to have lunch the following week. I did not tell Eli what I had done. I booked a flight to Santa Fe, New Mexico. My college roommate, a woman named Adele, had been asking me to visit for 3 years. I had always put it off, too busy, too much to manage. Maybe next season. I called her on a Thursday evening and I said, "Adele, I'm coming. The 14th of June. Is that still good?" She said, "Barbara Jean, get on that plane." I packed a bag with linen shirts and comfortable shoes and 3 paperback novels. I left the magnolia tree and the pale yellow house and I flew to New Mexico, where the sky is a color that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. The 14th of June was a Saturday. In Santa Fe, I woke up early because I always wake up early, and Adele and I drove out to a market at the edge of town that sells handmade jewelry and chilies dried in long braided strings. I bought a pair of turquoise earrings I still wear. We had breakfast at a small place where the eggs came from chickens. You could see through the window pecking around in the yard. I had 2 cups of coffee. The coffee was very good. My phone started ringing at 10:47 in the morning. Eli. Then again. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Renata's mother. Then Eli's father, Gordon, who I had not spoken to in 11 years and who had absolutely no standing to call me about anything. And yet there he was, name on my screen, calling from a parking lot somewhere. Then Eli again. Then a text from a number I didn't know that said, "This is Renata. Please call me back. This is an emergency." I counted. By noon, I had 27 missed calls. I watched them come in and I felt something I can only describe as a kind of enormous stillness. Not satisfaction exactly. Not revenge. Just clarity. The clarity of a woman who knows exactly what she is and what she has given and what she is no longer willing to give away. I texted Eli once. I said, "I'm in Santa Fe. I hope you find a solution. I love you." I put my phone face down on the table and I finished my coffee. What I learned later, from Eli himself, months afterward, when he came to me in the way people only come when they have truly run out of anything else, was this: the vendors had been booked under my name, and when the cancellations had come through weeks earlier, the Whitmore estate had sent confirmation to my email address, which I had provided as the primary contact. Eli had never thought to ask. He had assumed I would simply continue to pay for and coordinate a celebration I had been told I wasn't welcome to attend. The caterer wasn't there. The florist wasn't there. The string quartet wasn't there. The venue itself, having canceled the booking and returned my deposit, had scheduled a corporate event for that Saturday. When Eli and Renata arrived with their guests, there was a pharmaceutical sales conference being set up in the main hall. I did not take pleasure in that image for long. I want to be honest. When Eli eventually told me what had happened, what I felt was grief, not triumph. I grieved for the boy who deserved a wedding, for the years between us that were going to need careful repair. I grieved a little for myself, for the version of that day I had imagined, standing in the back of a beautiful room, watching my son make a promise to someone who might, with time, come to understand why I was worth knowing. The unexpected part of the story, the part I couldn't have planned, was Renata's father. His name was Charles. I had never met him. I knew, vaguely, that he was a retired judge from Charlotte, that he had paid for the rehearsal dinner without complaint, that Renata described him as a man of very few words who preferred deeds to conversation. What I did not know was that Charles had quietly asked Eli 2 weeks before the wedding why his mother was not on the guest list. Eli had said something vague, that I had declined to attend, that I had felt the situation was too emotional. Charles had not said anything more at the time. What he did after the wedding that wasn't was drive to Asheville, not to call, not to text, to drive, in person, 3 hours from Charlotte and knock on my door. I was back from Santa Fe by then, back in my yellow house, watering the containers on the back porch. I opened the door to a man in his 70s, very upright, in a light blue shirt. He introduced himself. He said he owed me an apology on behalf of his family for what had been done, and that he said it knowing an apology didn't fix anything and wasn't offered as a way to fix anything but simply because it was the right thing to do. I invited him in. We sat on the porch and I made iced tea and we talked for 2 hours. He told me that he had not raised his daughter to treat people the way she had treated me, and that the conversation he'd had with her in the days since had been long and necessary. He said he didn't know what shape things would take going forward, but that he wanted me to know that my son had married into a family that, at its core, understood the weight of what had been done. He drove back to Charlotte after that. He shook my hand at the door. He said, "I hope your son figures out what he's got in you, Barbara." I hope so too. Eli called me on a Sunday in late August. He asked if he could come over. He came alone. He drove up from Charlotte, where he and Renata were staying with her parents while they worked out the practical and emotional wreckage of a wedding that had not happened. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table he had done homework at as a boy. and he talked for a long time. Not making excuses, exactly. Trying to understand what had happened to him, how he had allowed himself to become someone who sent that text. I listened. I did not rush to forgive him, and I did not refuse to. I told him the truth, that forgiveness was not something I could hand over like a gift at the end of a conversation, that it was a thing that would be built slowly over a long time with consistent and reliable behavior on his part. I told him I loved him in the same absolute way I always had, and that love and trust were not the same thing, and that the trust would take time. He cried at my kitchen table. I put my hand on his. I let him cry. Renata called me the following week. That conversation was harder and shorter and more formal. She apologized. It did not feel entirely natural, but it was said, and I accepted it as the beginning of something rather than the end. Charles had clearly had more than one long conversation with his daughter. I was grateful for that. We are not where I hoped we would be by now. That is the honest truth. There are Sunday dinners that are still somewhat careful, silences that are still being navigated, a relationship between me and my daughter-in-law that is being rebuilt board by board. It is slow work. I do it because Eli is my son and because I am 63 years old, and I know that the slow work is usually the work that lasts. What I want to say to anyone who reads this, if there is a woman somewhere who is standing in her kitchen in her reading glasses with a cold cup of coffee, who has given everything she had and been handed the text that told her none of it counted, what I want to say is this: you know what you're worth. You have always known. The people who tried to make you forget it were wrong, and the people who tried to make you believe your kindness made you manageable were wrong. And the part of you that went still and clear when the clarity finally came, that part was right. The magnolia tree is blooming again. It does every April. I didn't do anything to deserve it. It blooms anyway. That is enough. That has always been enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not to rehearse it or reframe it, just to sit with it the way you sit with something that changed you permanently and quietly. What I keep coming back to is this: the choices we make, consistently over years and decades, eventually come back around. Not as punishment, not as reward, just as consequence, the plain, unglamorous, utterly honest consequence of who we chose to be when nobody was watching. Eli had been choosing for several years to take without accounting, to receive without accounting, to receive without acknowledging, to assume that love, because it was reliable, was also infinite and without limit. He had been making that choice in small ways long before the text that Tuesday morning, the dinners he canceled last minute, the holidays he shortened, the way he stopped asking how I was doing and started calling only when he needed something navigated. I had noticed. I had told myself it was a season, that it would pass. I had loved him through it. But love doesn't erase a pattern. It just waits for the pattern to finish speaking. And when the pattern finally spoke clearly, when it said plainly, "You are not welcome," something in me recognized the truth of it. Not the cruelty, the truth. He had been moving toward that text for a long time without knowing it. And I had been moving toward my answer for just as long. The wisdom I've earned, and I use that word carefully because I think wisdom is something you earn through cost, not something you receive, is that integrity is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make speeches. What I did, calling June and Alice and driving to the Whitmore estate, was not a grand gesture. It was simply the next honest thing, and then the next, and then the next. That's all integrity ever is. The accumulation of the next honest thing. What I want the people who are living inside a version of this story to understand, the ones who are ironing someone's shirt while being told they're too much, who are writing the check while being told they don't fit, is that your dignity was never theirs to grant. You brought it with you. It is yours in the same way your name is yours, in the same way your history is yours. Nobody can text it away from you. Charles drove 3 hours to knock on my door. He didn't have to. He did it because he had spent a lifetime understanding that what we owe each other, at the most basic level, is honest accounting. He looked at what his family had done and he named it clearly, and he showed up. That cost him something. It costs everyone something to show up honestly. The people who do it anyway, those are the ones worth knowing. Eli is learning. It is slow, and it is real, and I believe in it the way I believe in the magnolia tree. It doesn't bloom because I believe in it. It blooms because it was built to, because the conditions are right, because time did its patient work. Eli is doing the slow work now. I am watching. I am here. That is what I have. That is enough.